In a world where many people see reality as a circle or a rectangle, the truth is that issues are cylinders. Rather than a two-dimensional understanding, we will flush out the three-dimension complexities through nuanced conversation and civil, respectable discourse to highlight all perspectives on controversial issues. I'm your host, William Roosh, a high school teacher who's trying to transform education as we know it. Welcome to the Anti-Echo Chamber. This is Cylinder Radio. Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, high school civics, government, U.S. history, social studies. I taught art history once, teacher, and now podcast host. And today I'm going to dive into trying to find out about COVID and other elements from an objective standpoint and how challenging that is. And my guest is another one of my like a lot of my guests where it's kind of hard to put everything on a note card, like everything that he does. But law and public policy expert, university lecturer, and partner at Mehlman Castagnetti Rosen and Thomas. Is that right? Bipartisan lobbying firm.
Well done.
All right. Bruce Mehlman, thank you so much. Just a little background why I reached out to you. My cousin is in like mergers and acquisitions. He's like a finance guy, and he shout out to Matt who listens to the podcast. But he sent me the breakdown that you guys did about coronavirus when it first happened, and basically here's what we know, here's what it looks like, here's what to expect for the upcoming election, and it was here's what the Democrats are going to say, here's what the Republicans are going to say, here's the way it's all going to unfold. And I shared it with my civics class, and like I do in my civic class, I say, poke holes in this. Where is this bad? How is this leading? And all this kind of stuff. And they were kind of stumped, which tells me that there's something good. I like to always try and prove my ideas wrong. And it was a really good objective breakdown of what COVID is and how it's going to kind of play out in society. So I was like, this is right in line with everything that I'm doing. So thank you for being here, Bruce. Thank you.
Hey, look, I appreciate your having me. I love what you do for a living. Your day job, that is. I think it's super cool that people are teaching civics, let alone history. You know, my love of American history absolutely positively dates back to a couple of unbelievably awesome teachers I had a long time ago in my own high school experience. And I mean, this guy and I did not agree on politics, but boy, was he an unbelievably great guide for me and an experience that I had. And the fact that he kind of welcomed debate really helped shape my career in my life.
Yeah, I mean, I taught government, but then I talked to some people that I really respect. And even like I met Ben Shapiro one time, and he just got to sit down and talk to him about education. He's like, well, you know what they need to do? They need to teach civics. Civics needs to be in the classrooms because people are forgetting about the founding, And I was like, well, he's a smart guy. I don't agree with everything politically, but he's a smart guy. And then enough people were like, civics is needed. Civic Spirit, the organization in New York. I started working with them, and it's really needed. And now we're looking at all the civil unrest and stuff. It's like, woof.
Although, Will, let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
In the current environment, it feels like teaching civics is a bit perilous. You know, if you're trying to be down the middle of the fairway, and here's what one side says, and here's what the other side says, at least what you read is that there aren't two sides to a lot of questions in the minds of a lot of parents and the minds of a lot of educators. Yeah. And so, how do you find your ability to help folks have a safe space to take either ideological point of view and not, end up with World War III in your civic class?
That's a good question. I think education is obviously very, very on one side of the political spectrum, because I have gone through this journey. I mean, this podcast and everything for about 3 or 4 years now of having my world turned upside down, essentially, of like what I knew to be true. And I had those moments where it's like an M. Night Shyamalan movie where it's like, oh my God, what I thought was real is not. And, blah, blah, blah. And so the way I structure my civics class is I want far left, I want center left, I want center right, and I want far right. And the way I structure it is we're not opposing, we're shoulder to shoulder headed for the common goal of improving America, helping, give equality of opportunity to people that don't have it, all of those kinds of things. And I've been working a lot with Heterodox Academy, and I love Jonathan Haidt's work on the moral foundations of people and how, our brains are wired differently and stuff like that. So I structure it with that stuff. Or Arthur Brooks, Love Your Enemies and stuff like that, where it's very much about reaching across the lines, because we actually don't differ on that much, despite what CNN and Fox News tell you. Where our trunk is often the same. It's just out here on the branches we're a little different, and that's a good thing. So that's what I try to structure.
There occasionally you read about these awesome social science experiments where the woman from New York who's very liberal, which kind of fits anyway, was spent a week with a family. I think it was rural Ohio, and then he spent the week with her, and they both started with extraordinarily hostile, pre-existing, preconceived notions. And when they were done, neither had turned the other one ideologically around, but they both had a lot more respect for the other. They realized, you know what, I don't agree on a lot of the public policy questions, but he's a good guy or she's a good person. And the people with whom you disagree on ideological issues can still be likable fellow Americans. And it's something I worry. It's great that you're doing the show in that spirit and you teach in that spirit, because one of the things that I worry a lot about is, we have shifted from an era where we all got shared facts and shared news from the Walter Cronkites who informed us, to where we just go to where we're going to be affirmed. So right of center to Fox News, left of center to MSNBC. And it makes us not only have a different grounding in like core facts of what we're talking about, but we no longer believe in the other side being the loyal opposition. We start believing that they're a threat to democracy. And that's when things unravel.
Yeah, I mean, what's something I talk about on my social media all the time, my class all the time, is seeking disconfirmation. Heather Heying, the brilliant evolutionary biologist, she was saying it's kind of scientific method. Like, if you have a theory, try to prove yourself wrong. And if you can't, then you might be onto something. But instead, we do confirmation bias, which is so easy with all of the media out there. You can always find someone to support it. But right now, as we record this, what's happening, because this is like the 28th of August, this is what's happening in Kenosha. And what's interesting about that, what's terrifying about it, is it looks like a civil war. We have armed civilians shooting at other armed civilians on the streets of small town America. But what's interesting about it, along these lines of what you and I are discussing right now, is one side, quote unquote, because there's a whole bunch of different perspectives, but they're seeing this person is the hero, that person is the villain. And the other side is seeing the opposite. Oh, that person you're touting as a hero, they are the villain. And so we are really lost, because it's not like, oh, they're not, like the fact that we're exactly opposite, and that is fueled by the media, that's fueled by all kinds of stuff. And it's really worrisome.
No, I think you're right. And social media, cable made that hard, and social media has made it even more difficult. Yeah. Although, I don't know if it sounds like you read everything. There's a guy named Ben Thompson. He writes something called Stratechery. It's much more about technology companies and policy. And so it may not be quite your lane, but he's written a few things that are really interesting on social media. And, especially in reaction to a lot of the people who complain about, we need to have disinformation, misinformation, we need to have more authoritative voices heard, and the sketchier voices not heard. And he points out, it kind of cuts both ways. So, for example, if you grew up in a small town and you were LGBTQ, a decade ago, or a generation or two generations ago, people in that little town might have told you something's wrong with you, and you might have believed them, when in reality, nothing's wrong with you at all. But you didn't have a community to reaffirm your value and your normalcy, and that everything was okay. And the ability now, thanks to social media, to find people just like you and experiences just like you, and to realize, you're awesome and there's absolutely nothing wrong. It's just you're in a really small town, is really good. At the same time, the people in a really small town who believe in some kind of crazy conspiracy theory, or take anti-vaxxers, who believe that it's a secret plot. When they'd go around and nobody agrees with them, and they might doubt their conspiracy theory because it's not real. And yet when they find a community of one another like them, suddenly you have QAnon, where you have all of these folks buying into the same conspiracy, reaffirming one another. And it's, it's the internet really isn't good or evil. It just magnifies. So it magnifies the things that are great, but it also magnifies the things that are dangerous.
Yeah, and I've talked about that on past podcasts. Like Corey Clark was on; she's the social psychologist, and like how the tribalism and how it's exacerbated the tribalism. But what I'm trying to do with this podcast, my social media, is, are human beings tribal? Yes. Are they collaborative? Yes. So let's get the collaborative part of this. And when getting into, I think, well, actually, before we get into the COVID stuff, you're essentially a lobbyist. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's valid to discuss that, because lobbyists get a really bad reputation. There's a stigma around being a lobbyist, that you are going with a duffel bag full of cash to give it to a politician who's neutral on the topic, and whoever gives them the bigger duffel bag, they're going to support policies for the companies you represent. Now, I understand it a little bit better than that, but I think that, can you give us just like the reality of what it means to be a lobbyist in DC?
I'm happy to, although I'm tempted, Will, to just because we're on Zoom here and we can, do a quick. It doesn't let me share screen. I was going to show you. There's a really funny
meme
picture from the internet.
I've seen the meme where it's like what my parents think. Well,
right.
Yeah. It's great.
I was going to find that. But
okay, no, I know that one. Yeah.
Look, I love what I do. It's really interesting, and I guess I'll come at it two ways. First, the actuality of what lobbying is sits at the intersection of government policy. Think about a Venn diagram. One is government policy. What's the right tax rate? Should it be 100%, which kind of was the old communist idea, from each according to his ability, to each according to their need? Well, no, because then people won't have the incentive or the motivation to do, to dare great things, to invent the iPhone. It's like, I'd rather maximize my leisure time if there's no, more risk, more reward. At the same time, should it be zero, the Ayn Rand ideal from the libertarian? No. We need to help people who can't help themselves. We need infrastructure. We need roads. We need research and development, the common defense. So, we don't want people to smoke cigarettes, so we raise taxes on cigarettes. We do want people to drive more fuel-efficient vehicles, so we give tax credits for Teslas. I find government policy really interesting. That's part of what I do. Part of what I do is just the raw marketing. In the same way, if you're in an appellate advocacy environment, you're trying to get 2 out of the 3 judges on an appeals court to see it your way. My job is to try to get, out of 535 judges, a majority in the House and 60% in the Senate to also see it my way. A lot of it is to understand politics, what makes people win or lose elections, and you can frame it like that. And sometimes it's about sociology, where you have to help political leaders who want to lead understand that the poll they remember from 2 years ago is not where America is today. In fact, more and more Americans increasingly, just to pick on something we mentioned before, see LGBTQ as civil right. And so marriage equality should be, something that you embrace, something that everybody, the vast majority of people under 50, for example, see with no question. As for, you're right, we get beat up a lot, lobbying, people hate lobbying. At the same time, try to think of a profession where we don't outsource specific things to experts. So, for example, do we say you go defend yourself in court and the other person will defend themselves in court? No, we say let's get people who are specialized at doing this. If this podcast goes crazy and you decide you want to start advertising on TV, are you going to write all the ads? Well, you might have a role in it, but you also might hire somebody who's a real expert in how to run an effective advertising. You see within education, and every field has specialization. Last point on that, Will, and it's a long answer, sorry.
That's great.
Think about this. If you neutron bomb Washington, take out every human being, leave the infrastructure, what are you going to do? First, you're going to replace this Congress. What are you going to replace them with? A citizen legislature. What do we have now? A citizen legislature. A third of them are lawyers with all kind of legal backgrounds. 26% have business backgrounds. Only 12% are career politicians. Most of these folks are from all walks of life. And so, like, my old boss a long time ago was a former professional football player, Orange Bowl MVP, in fact.
Oh, wow.
And I remember when the Clinton administration was looking to, pass the National Nanotechnology Initiative, he came to me. This guy's a former football player. He's like, Bruce, what do you think of this? Should, think it's the right thing for my district? And I said, well, I'm a history major. What's nanotechnology? I've never heard about it. Because less than 1% of members have a background in science and technology. So they elected officials who ran for the right reasons, need help from the real world. And then the people who are in the real world, the people who are using nanotechnology, they're inventing, they're building, they're actually doing their jobs. They don't have all day to go talk to some knucklehead staffer. So you need some kind of middleware to help policymakers get answers so that the policies they propose can be most helpful, and to get real world people, doctors and teachers and inventors, able to have what they're doing better understood and better supported by policymakers. The middleware, lobbyists.
Yeah, I think thank you. I think that's a good answer. Like, just kind of explaining the basics, like nuts and bolts of it. I think that people need to recognize that you might be mad because someone is a lobbyist for like the NRA and you're against guns, but that Mothers Against Drunk Driving, raised the drinking age and through lobbyists too. So whatever your kind of passion is, you want to have a voice for these representatives. I was just listening to Dan Crenshaw was on Brett Weinstein's podcast, and he was just talking about how part of what his job is as a representative is you kind of hear out from these different lobbyists, and you kind of like, you have to decide like which one of you is bullshitting me. Like, all right, I'm going to hear this. And then that's part of what a politician should do. All of our politicians should be listening to all of these different voices in their head and deciding, which one is the best for my constituency. And that's, if you don't have anyone there, now you have these, like you said, like these people in Congress are not, they can't be expected to be experts on everything. So you have people there to explain their side of it. And the Democrats have a lot of lobbyists, and so do the Republicans, or they're like kind of their side. So everyone hopefully will be represented in some way. And if not, then that's why there's a strength in power of the people. And you form small things with social media. There are beautiful things with social media. Enough people care about something, you gather together people, you get enough of a following, and then you can hire a lobbying firm. And that's just the reality, that you can get your voice heard in Washington. We are a republic.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's certainly been my experience. And when I was a staffer, I took every meeting that was requested of me. I assumed, sounds like Congressman Crenshaw, of course people are advocating for their side of it. So you shouldn't hook, line, and sinker just say whatever you say, that's the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But you give me your best facts. What I used to do is you'd show up and you'd give me a report, and I'd go to the opposition and I'd say, he gave me this report, what do you think? And they'd come back and they'd punch holes, and I'd go back to you, and vice versa. They'd give me a report and I'd go back to you. And the member of Congress's job is to find the facts. And it's not that either side necessarily is even lying. It's that the person who's manufacturing believes that what they make and the jobs they have are really important, and they're right. And the person who cares about the environment believes that clean air and clean water are important, and they're right. And the thing that sucks about being a member of Congress, or that's hard, is what do you do when you have two worldviews that are both right but not totally consistent?
There you go. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up, sir. Like the idea that politicians are just neutral. So let's just take like the biggest, like NRA is probably ranked like 154th as far, I think that's what it was. I was talking about. It's like money given, but that is vilified a lot. And I'm not like picking a side here on the NRA, but the point is that I don't think that someone who's very staunchly against guns is going to take, whatever it is, take like, a donation to their campaign or something and change their mind on that. The way it typically works is you have a passion for something, you look for people who are trying to understand it, and then you help guide them there. Or that this congressman, already is a strong Second Amendment advocate, and you go, oh, okay, well that's the NRA is going to go, that's where I'm going to donate my money. So that's a special interest group, which I know is a different thing. But I think that there's an element here where we have to understand that these are human beings that have their own views clearly, and they're not going to change that just because of like someone being convincing, in lobbying or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying. It's a little jumbled, but
no, it makes, you're of course right. Neither campaign donation nor a particularly smooth lobbyist changes. At the end of the day, the incentive is they want to get reelected. Yeah. And so, it should work where you get reelected if you are a good steward of the public interest and that you represent your district well. One of the things that makes America beautiful, but also makes it challenging in Congress, is some people represent urban downtown LA, and some people might represent, a very agricultural community far east of where that is. And they don't necessarily see everything the same way. I'm going to turn off my phone. I should have turned it to mute. Hang on one second.
Oh, no worries. I couldn't even hear
it. All good.
Yeah. No problem.
You're supposed to turn it to mute, or at least have it within arm's length.
Yeah, no worries. No, that's I think that's an important point that we have to understand this, because again, just like everything when we started this conversation, we're looking at the lobbyists for the things I disagree with are evil, but the lobbyists that are on my side, those are the heroes. And it's just, you can't play that game. You got to hold yourself to the same standard. The I don't know, what would you call it? The informational slideshow. What was that? The COVID thing that you guys produced in whatever March. What was that?
So every quarter we put out an infographics analysis. It's an abuse of PowerPoint that just tries to look at macro policy and political trends. I was doing them for years. I would give speeches and people would always ask for copies of it. And then I found if you shared the copy of the slides, even if people didn't ask you to speak, maybe they would ask you to speak, or they'd find it interesting. Will, you've got your podcast that you kind of do as a hobby, which I'm sure your family's like, why are you putting so much time and energy and effort into it? I've got these quarterly analyses that I do, and they've taken on a life of their own, where like that one got downloaded more than 120,000 times. It's just a part of it is everybody's stuck at home online, and there's no live sports. So sure, it's free. Well, I'll do it. But I've really enjoyed doing them. And somewhere around maybe 2017, I went from a little bit less of the, what's coming up in Congress, what are they going to vote on, what are the elections that might be ahead, to try to do a broader look of what's going on in our society more broadly. And in fact, it was thanks to my being a teacher, because I had another one of these quarterly analyses due, and I didn't know what I was going to write. And when I did my classes, I found that students all thought it was really interesting, but they kept saying that was the most interesting teacher we had in this whole series. But boy, he was depressing. And I don't want to be depressing. I'm a total optimist. Like I am optimistic about life, about America. And so I'm like, what's a more optimistic framing?
Yeah.
And ultimately what I came up with and what I taught, and then what I published was, go back and look at America in the Gilded Age. And I'm a history nerd too. When you look, I was going to say, look at the book behind me, but I got the virtual they're all flags. There's a book somewhere back there. Yeah. And in America in the Gilded Age, you had rising inequality. You had historic levels of immigration, which was great for many people and scary for other people. You had very high level. You had new technologies like railroad and electricity, kind of changing life and making people feel really disrupted. You had a bit of a gridlock in Washington with a very small number of very wealthy individuals kind of dominating politics. That's today. That was the Gilded Age. And what happened is then you had Williams Jennings Bryan and kind of some populist movements promising everything to everybody, and you had a progressive era. So to deal with the trust, the Bezoses of their day, you had antitrust law get invented, and you had food safety law and worker safety law and pro-union stuff. To deal with inequality, they passed the constitutional amendment for an income tax. There was there was direct election of senators, women getting the right to vote in 1920. So, 100 years ago, not quite today, but pretty close. And there was even the sense that kids in school back then were only getting 1st through 8th grade, totally inconsistent who was learning what. And the business leaders said, we're not getting the workforce we need for this new industrial era. And the high school movement got born, and the 9th through 12th became standardized around the country, which helped America dominate the 20th century as an economic and for that matter, in other ways too. We are at the dawn of a new Gilded Age because, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree with you. No, I was just saying, I've been saying this because I love teaching the Gilded Age. And there's an element here that I said, I'm looking at this. When we talk about regulations, I just had Thor Skanke on my last podcast. He owns a gym in California right now, which is not a good time to be a gym owner, and it's struggling. My wife is a salon owner. Salons are still shut down in California. It's really tough to be a small business owner. And when we talk about regulations, like Facebook is not regulated. Like it's these giant companies. The regulations don't really affect them. They affect the small business owner. And, I'll pose this question to you. Do we need a Teddy Roosevelt? So for you guys who are unfamiliar, Teddy Roosevelt came in. He's like, hey, you robber barons, as they called him, these, big, super wealthy kind of fat cats. This isn't your country. You don't get to just do whatever you want. This is the country of the people. And I'm going to basically take you out, take you down to size if you're a bad monopoly that's bad for the people. And, that is dangerous to a degree, but do we need something like that where someone's going to come in and just like tell these giant corporations, like, you don't call all the shots? And because it's also bipartisan. I mean, it seems like this is a little long question for you, but it seems like the Democrats are the party of the working class and the Republicans are the party of the, wealthy or the elite, the educated. But somewhere in the 90s, it seems like it switched, and now they're both kind of bought out by big corporations. So who is standing up for the working class? Like, I don't know, because there's a lot of working class factory working. I know a lot of Hispanic, like landscapers and stuff like that are wearing red MAGA hats. And there's a lot of people in, housing projects in New York that are hardcore Democrats. Like, who's speaking up for the working class right now, and who is not kind of bought out by big corporations? Seem like they're all the same, right?
I guess that's a heck of a question. There's a lot
I know. Just give me your thoughts on just like kind of the whole thing.
Yeah. First, yeah. Washington and Washington politics is not unfairly seen as a nasty kind of crazy place these days, and there's a lot of that there. Mm-hmm. At the same time, one of the frustrating things is that the sum is less than the parts. Almost every member of Congress, almost every senator, almost every staffer, not 100%, but almost all that I know, are pretty good folks who ran because they genuinely want to make the country better. They're not trying to screw the other side or other people. You get them on cable TV and all, and they start saying some ugly, crazy stuff. Yeah. But they would be happy to, and they do compromise unless you turn on the light of cable, and then they scurry away. One of the things there's a lot of agreement on is we need to re-examine the way we think about competition policy and antitrust. And it's Republicans and Democrats. Mm-hmm. I don't think they have not been doing it. I don't think that what's held them back is they're bought. They're not bought. In fact, these biggest companies are the ones who are at risk. And the challenge in part is American antitrust law has long said, well, if consumers are getting stuff if consumers aren't being squeezed on prices, that's good.
Yeah.
So how much did you pay Google last month to search 6 trillion things you chose to search? The answer is $0. You paid $0.
I gave him my information.
You gave a lot of information. Now, granted, you could have gone to other people who would have taken your information, Bing or others. It's so the historic sense. Once upon a time, the problem of Rockefeller and others is they would gain a monopoly and then they would screw everybody else.
Yeah.
And interestingly, in this data era where we haven't historically put assigned a value to the data, and look, you and I, if we watch TV, or at least when TV was free over-the-air TV, we accepted the TV in return for having advertisements put in front of us. That's kind of the value proposition for a Facebook or others.
Yeah.
So some of this is not as simple as if everybody just weren't bought by big corporations, everything would be great. And even, as you're a history guy, even you go back and you read Teddy Roosevelt, and he kind of was buying into eugenics in the day because that's what all the smart people told you were supposed to buy into. Turns out that's really bad and really wrong. And, you take a look at, some of his foreign policy, and it was fairly imperialist.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And again, I'm a fan of Teddy Roosevelt. One of the things that really bums me out about modern politics and about people looking at history is this now belief that if you're somehow not a perfect human, you're unfit. When there in American history, there were no perfect leaders. Abraham Lincoln, great guy, one of my heroes if you decide to pick presidents as heroes, but a flawed human like all of us.
Yes.
And I always felt Mitt Romney is a very decent guy, but the ugliness of politics in 2012 had people claiming he's waging a war on women. What's the proof of that? Well, he said they had binders full of women, which is an awkward way of him pointing out that he was running an affirmative action effort to give more jobs to female staffers so that women would be in higher positions, which is exactly what you're told you're supposed to do. But since he's a Republican and since he's a pretty stiff dude, they went after him. it is unfortunate and is demeaning because he's actually a good man. You
Yeah.
might not like that he made a lot of money in private equity. Okay, it's everybody can't be a civics teacher, which, by the way, nobody shoots at because what you guys do is pretty cool. But we should stop figuring out what are the 3 ways to blow this person up for being evil, and instead say, on balance, this person, whether living today or Thomas Jefferson or, Alexander Hamilton, perfect? No. On net, a contributor, especially given what was known and what was believed at the time, sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, that goes into like cancel culture and stuff like that. You want to go after Mitt Romney for being a bad guy. Republicans are just like, Mitt Romney, McCain, they're terrible. They're racist. They're terrible. Okay, fine. Screw it. We're going to put in Donald Trump. Like be careful. And I want to be clear too. I'm not vilifying Amazon. I actually made a post the other day. I bought a jump rope on Amazon and didn't show up in 2 days. So they sent me this message. We're sorry that it didn't show up in 2 days. It'll be here tomorrow or it's free. And I was talking on like my stories on Instagram and I was like talking to them into my phone. I was like, do you know how hard it is and how incredible it is that I was like, I just want a jump rope. Deliver it to me. And it just shows up on my door in 2 days. And if not, then it's free. This is incredible. People are putting, a lot of like some like really extreme people are putting a guillotine outside of Jeff Bezos's house. It's like, gee, like it's hard for us to run a salon with 12 employees. I think Jeff Bezos is doing, I think he's not a perfect person by any means. I think he's in some ways a conqueror and stuff like that, but Amazon is incredible. I don't want to get rid of Amazon. I don't want to get rid of Google.
Look, certainly the service is great. One of the hits on Amazon, and not an unreasonable hit though, is they're both the referee and one of the combatants. And so if you want to sell, you don't have to sell on their platform, but so many people turn to their platform to do their e-commerce that you really do, if you're a small business owner, want to sell on their platform. And when you're selling on their platform, they see what's selling and it informs them about what they should offer, and they see what prices it sells for, and it informs them about what prices they might want to charge. And then they build the algorithm to decide what products are seen where. So you can find a lot of small business owners who would say, look, the platform that he built is brilliant, but we can't compete against Jeff Bezos on Amazon, and we can't compete if we're not on Amazon. And a lot of the antitrust conversation that's being had right now is whether, if you're on all sides of it, it's fair to the competitors. And, as low as their prices are, as low as Walmart's prices are, maybe the concern is they're harming competition, even if they're not harming consumers, at least directly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's kind of, I mean, I think Elon Musk actually said, he's like, it's getting too big or whatever. And like, we want to keep innovating because you can get stagnant. But it's almost like with the stuff, like we have a clear problem with policing in America. Like there's a problem. And I think there's a racial element. I think there's a lot of different elements. I think a big thing of it, and I was listening to Jocko Willink, the Navy SEAL commander, talk about it, is there's things we can do to fix policing. We really can. Community outreach, demilitarization, de-escalation drills and things like that. Better training and all, there's all of the, maybe getting rid of no-knock warrants. There's all these specific things. But the idea to just sink the boat and then while we're treading water, we're going to build a new boat. Like, no, like Amazon, there are problems with Amazon in America. So let's fix those problems. And that's the policy that we need. You don't demolish it. This idea that of destroy these institutions or these giant corporations. It's like, no, we tweak them. And that's the way we typically do in history. Wouldn't you agree?
Look, this is why we need more civics teachers. At the end of the day, the founders built a system predicated on compromise.
That's the whole point. Yeah.
And plenty of compromises, I mean, particularly back then, were unholy, and plenty of compromises today are insufficient. Yeah. At the same time, we're a diverse country. We have a wide range of people and a wide range of needs. I'm very much personally of a moderate, which tends to seemingly these days piss everybody off. But I believe in progress as 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And a lot of people think, no, throw the bomb, throw a touchdown every time. And if you fail to try for 100% of what you want, whether it's a Green New Deal or whether it's drilling in the Arctic, national refuge. If you fail to do that, then, then you're morally wrong, as opposed to you're trying to make things better. And sometimes you make things better a step at a time.
I have a question for you, because you'd be the person to ask. I just thought of this. Like, do you think this is tied to the fact that we are in a world where everything is instant? Like, my kids are like, I want to listen to this song, and they just get it. Hey, Alexa, get the song. We're like, when I was their age, I want to listen to a song, I would have to go to the store and buy the CD, and I would have to wait for my parents to drive. Everything's so instant. The food that I want is delicious. Instacart shows up at my house. Everything is so soon. So the idea that we have to, like, these are giant ships, and to shift the direction of a giant ship, it takes some time. It doesn't steer like a jet ski. Do you think that that's part of it?
No, not necessarily. No? Because if you were to ask me generationally, who are the folks who kind of have gotten us here and who are the most at each other's throats, I don't know that I'd say it's the millennials and Gen Z. It's not the digital natives. I mean, they've got their views, and that's all fine and dandy. But I am far readier to throw the baby boomers under the bus. And I'm Gen X, and maybe we Gen Xers are to blame. I mean, the silents are kind of a little bit gone these days.
Yeah, they are.
Although Joe Biden's running to be the first silent generation person ever elected president. Certainly it's their last shot as a generation. But so I start by saying it doesn't feel generationally like I didn't grow up with all of that stuff. So I developed my sense of things differently. As a guy who's a podcast guy and a big reader, you may or may not have read Ezra Klein's Why We're Polarized.
I'm familiar with Ezra Klein. I think I heard him talk about it on a podcast.
So it's a great book. He's certainly left of where I am on a lot of issues, but it's a brilliant book.
Smart guy, yeah.
And it gets into not only the history and not only how media evolved in a way to like encourage partisanship or not encourage partisanship and to change again, but even to the point of, the way ads are run. They play to that kind of that reptilian tribal part of your brain. And so, and it's some people want to, I mean, it's way before the 2020 elections. It's way before the 2016 elections. I don't know that the Daisy ad against Barry Goldwater was the origin of negative campaigning. It probably wasn't. It probably preceded that meaningfully, but that's a good example where, hey, you vote for that guy, we're going to have nuclear annihilation. I'm like, well, that's so because that works, because negative ads work, politicians keep going to negative ads. And, that leads to this kind of level of hyper intensity. I mean, here's the counterintuitive thing. Yeah. You and I would say transparency matters. You need to know. You can't have an effective democracy if you feel like everything's in a secret back room.
Yes.
At the same time, we're in this instant transparency now where, so if one of the great achievements in the 20th century legislatively, I think, is the Voting Rights Act. Passed in 1965. Lyndon Johnson was the president at the time. And you can just imagine Johnson would call congressmen and senators from both parties. They'd come up to the White House and he'd put his big old arm around them. And it's kind of like, Will, what do you need? You need a hospital? Like, this is the right thing, and it's the right thing. And if it's going to cause you political pain, let me figure out something that will sort of offset it so you'll have something positive to run on, even if this is going to create a little bit of a headwind for you.
Work with them.
And he'd have all these conversations, and you weren't reading about them real time. These days, if President Bruce invites Will up, it's on the president's calendar is supposed to be transparent, so it's on the day book. President Obama, as you saw, everybody was meeting with. President Trump's a little bit less transparent about it, but so suddenly it's known you're going to be up there. And starting in the morning, the talk radio folks are like, Will's going to cave. He always caves. That guy's not a real, Democrat, Republican, fill in the blank. And suddenly social media is lighting you up. And before you even come to have the first conversation with me about something that's of national importance, you've had to put out a statement. I am against this. I will be against this. Like you've fully said, never going to happen. Sherman-esque. Let me ask, is transparency made democracy better in that regard? And I'm really torn because I don't want things in backroom deals, but people ought to be able to get advice. They ought to be able to deliberate. They ought to have time and space to think and to try to convince one another. That's why I was saying before, many of the great accomplishments that I see happen because people are in a safe ability to compromise because everybody is so outraged by, climate or by, you pick the huge issues. It's the huge issues that animate every second of cable TV and cable news, that's when it gets super hard to get anything done. But the only good news about that is that gives cover for people like Claire McCaskill, who's not there anymore, but Amy Klobuchar and a senator from Minnesota, and Rob Portman, a senator from Ohio. They're actually great at working with each other and working with other people. Just don't tell anybody that, because they can't afford the world to think that when it's time to run in their primaries.
Yeah, I mean that's so. Yeah, I mean even just talking across lines or anything like that. I think Tulsi Gabbard seems like she's kind of a pariah a little bit on the Democrat side, but the fact that she would go on Fox News, or the fact that Dan Crenshaw would go on Brett Weinstein's podcast, or Joe Rogan's podcast or something like that. I think that's a good thing to kind of like cross pollinate a little bit and just show that like we started off talking about, like, why not talk across the aisle? And I think you're exactly right, is that it gets blown up in the media as that's a bad thing. But like, I mean, my kids love Hamilton, and early America is founded on these big ideas, and you what are you going to do? You have to figure this out. You have to compromise. What else are you going to do? We're just going to be at each other's throats, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Now, look, you're right, except when the compromise is the 3/5 compromise. At least history would judge that as the original sin and evil. And the challenge is everybody these days portrays any deal they don't like as a compromise of epic, of morality and of epic proportion. And I think the reality is, for most public policy, if you can make the environment a little bit better in the next piece of legislation, do it, and then live to fight the next day. And to stay after it and to keep making progress is what was, is the only real way to make progress, and it's what's designed. But unfortunately, I mean, you mentioned policing reform, and I agree. Actually, when this is off, I'm going to track you down. Send me the thing that you either hosted or that you heard.
Yeah,
I'm really interested in that, because clearly there are things that need to happen. What we have, unfortunately, is the Republicans passed or have a bill in the Senate. The Democrats wouldn't let them move on to vote on it, because the Democrats had a bill they passed in the House, which is far more robust. Mm-hmm. You and I would say, okay, well, why don't we take the Democrats' bill in the House that passed and the Republicans' ideas in the Senate and have an open debate, and some hybrid that will be not as much as some people think and more than other people think, but it will make progress. I mean, clearly, to your point, something needs to get fixed. There's just too many murders out there. At the same time, the defund movement is way beyond what you're going to ever get a majority for, and it's obviously illogical, because the vast majority of police, the vast majority of the time, make all of us safer. We've just got to figure out how to root out the racist elements, and whether it's elements of training or it's I think the rare but very poisonous individuals.
Yeah. And I've talked to a lot of people in those bad neighborhoods, and they're like, get rid of police. Are you nuts? Like the vast majority. I had Danny Solario on my podcast, who does Compton Health Barge. He's, from Compton, and, loves that as our community. And she was explaining, like, the vast majority of people in South Central LA are good, hardworking, law-abiding citizens. And they hate that gang element, and they want it out. Like, but people in Santa Monica don't always recognize that, because they don't go to Compton. Talking about COVID just real quick, because we started this with, how do I kind of get both sides? Reading your breakdown, how do you do it? How do you see this as, you said you're a centrist, but you see this as like, this is with this side, this is this side. Like, how are you able to do that, where I couldn't tell by reading through that, like, where you stand politically? Which I think is good, because then it means it's like, okay, there's some truth here. There's like a place where a Democrat would agree with this, a Republican would agree with this, then maybe it's true, So how do you do it?
Well, so first, it's helpful. That's awesome. It's a great way for me to end the week here on Friday afternoon, to have you say that, because that's what we're going for. It helps. My firm is 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats among the professionals. So, wow. As with all of this stuff, solicit points of view outside of your worldview, whether it's ideological or outside of, if you only ask white people, you get a white people worldview, and that's an incomplete worldview, and it's not consistent with the nation. So, ask men, ask women, ask people of multiple colors. I start with that as my goal. I also try to read everything I can and listen to everything I can. And I work hard to make sure that the people that I follow on social aren't merely the people that kind of give you that warm feeling of, I knew there wasn't Santa Claus, but it's, I want to hear, yes, there is Santa Claus. I should read that at least to think about it. And in some ways I care more about the ability to articulate things in an intelligent way than I do about saying the thing that I always thought was true. So I try to read everything I can. I try to listen to as many things as I can. I have, within our firm, we're half D's and half R's. And so, we go back and forth, and that helps leaven things. There's a decent number of friends I have out there when I'm kind of near penultimate draft, I will then bounce it off. A good friend of mine who's pretty senior in Biden land. I'm like, what do you think of this? Shoot holes at it.
Yeah.
And somebody who served in the administration, what do you think of this? Shoot holes in it.
Yeah.
What I don't want to do is I don't want to sand off the edges to the point where it's, says nothing.
Right.
But so you may come back and because, like in the world of lobbying, whether you're a lobbyist or not, everybody lobbies. If we're having pizza tonight, it's because I was successfully lobbied my wife. And really good lobbying. It's not about what I want, honey. It's the kids. The kids want pizza.
Pizza.
If it were me, I think a salad is the right thing to do, but I want to be a good dad here. So
you're good.
You solicit as many points of view, and you try to be honest about thinking about them, and like you were saying, you do for yourself. It's, am I right? Why am I right? Can I punch holes in my own argument? And you aim for that. And it helped by having that kind of broad team approach and by soliciting as many points of view, both before, during, and after, you do your best to come down in the middle of the fairway.
Yeah. The question that I have for you, and you see COVID pretty clearly, it seems like, even though you're not like specifically in the healthcare space, which I don't even know if they see it more clearly than you sometimes, because you have doctors that are so polarized, and doctors are asking, are you a Democrat or Republican, because they might want to prescribe hydrochloroquine. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. My question for you is, why is it, and this is, I don't know, maybe because it's not PC, but like, why is it that obesity and unhealthy lifestyle and bad immune systems are not brought up in the conversation for how COVID becomes deadly? Like diabetes, obesity, hypertension, lack of sleep, all of this stuff is going to cause you to have COVID be worse. But people aren't talking about that. Is it because it's not PC? I don't hear it that much. Like I don't hear it on the news about like, hey guys, go out, get your vitamin D, take a supplement, go out into the sun, go get exercise, get plenty of sleep. Like it's almost like COVID will supersede any kind of immune system you have, which is clearly not true. I don't know if you've seen that or if it's just me, but what are your thoughts on that?
So I guess I don't necessarily agree with the premise of the question. I feel like I see a lot of that.
You do?
At the end of the day, one of the core reasons that Americans of color are more likely to have COVID and are more likely to get sick from COVID is the pre-existing condition comorbidities that you just described. And so I feel like part of the challenge, again, is where are you going to read about COVID? And if you're going to the political pages, you're reading kind of politicians saying crazy things. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of the medical things that I've read, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not an epidemiologist, but like, as a parent of three, as the son of two parents who are still alive, like I'm kind of interested in everything we can learn. I would rather not get this disease. Even though overwhelming majority of people survive it, I would like to not, I don't feel like testing it. So I think it's pretty well, I think those points
on CNN. I hear you. I'm sorry to cut you off. I hear you, but
I don't watch CNN.
Right. So, but not like, but people don't read, they should, but they don't read health stuff. Like, I listen to like Dr. Rhonda Patrick is like someone I love. And she's like, health expert and like brilliant. And like, she breaks down all this stuff, but you don't see it, I guess you don't see it. Say like political media, but like everything's political media now. Like right. New York Times won't run that. I mean, maybe they have, and I just haven't seen it, but New York Times, I haven't seen like front page, hey, go out and live a healthy lifestyle, eat more salads, eat more fish, stuff like that. And that could actually help you fight COVID.
I feel like that coverage is out there, but it's,
Yeah.
we all have a finite amount of time, and you may be reading the coverage that takes those points and marries them to some of the politics. And once you
Yeah.
hit politics,
It's
a
all
lot
over.
of the basics, have melt away. I mean, the problem when you think about it is, if people ask you the question, so did we underprepare or overreact? The answer is probably yes. We definitely underprepared and underreacted, and we also overreacted. If next year somebody, I mean, you can't look at already 180,000 dead Americans, despite a very significant reaction, albeit not as much as we should have reacted, we'd think. But if we hadn't reacted at all, what would that number be? I mean, you'd be north of World War II deaths. And like, how do you not take
stadiums
that?
still full and stuff? Right.
Well, right. So clearly we needed to do stuff. I mean, there's a lot, and the blame can and should be leveled all around. There's a lot of mistakes we made. At the same time, if tomorrow, or if not tomorrow, if 2 years from now, I came to you and I said, all right, here's a new disease, and we know this new disease is 4 or 5 times as deadly as annual influenza. Now, the bad news about it too is that nobody's immune from it, so you don't have a vaccine, and you don't have a partial resistance. Everyone would probably get it. Would we say shut everything down, or would we say, well, that's scary, but we should figure out ways to take those with higher risk profiles who are significantly older or who have these comorbidities, protect them, but not create entirely different risks of small businesses getting shut down, and of deaths of despair, and of kids, losing a year of school, and all of those other, negatives that are happening. When all's said and done, it sure looks like, from everything you read, the COVID lethality is, 0.4, 0.5, so 4 or 5 times as deadly as annual influenza. Now, some of it is we just didn't know that going in. But the problem is, rather than people saying, everybody is blaming somebody else. So you're either pissed off that the doctors said that, we had to lock down when it turns out this thing's not that deadly, or you're pissed off that these, people without masks or college kids these days are spreading it. And the reality is, we ought to be mad at ourselves as much as anybody else. And instead, it's all about, I blame these people and they screwed everything up. Most of human condition until recently, we're spoiled. You made the point of expecting, Jeff Bezos to deliver something to your door. Until the 60s, really, the 1960s. So until the last 50 years, the human condition was diseases, whether it was polio or typhoid or cholera, just people, vast thousands and throngs of people would die. Spanish flu. Only recently have we come up with antibiotics and sewage systems and all of these things, where now we're freaked out by something that literally almost all of ancestors in human history would have just toughed it out, worn masks or done what they had to do. It's an awesome luxury that we have, being born when we were born. We should remember that whether it's about a question of civil rights in America, or whether it's a question about managing diseases or being able to work from home, as much as things feel like they suck, we're still at the greatest moment in American and human history for these things. And while we should not be complacent or satisfied, because clearly we've got problems, it's still, 2020 is still a better time to be an American of color than, when was better? 1970, 1920? No.
Say that, yeah.
Is it adequate? No. We shouldn't be satisfied, but we should recognize that we're at a better point than we've been. And likewise, fighting diseases, were we ready for this? No. Should we have been? We should have been a lot readier. We could have been a lot smarter, but we're still at a better age than, you go back 100 years, 200 years, and you'd be like, oh my God, everybody's living to 38. What the hell's up with this?
Yeah. That's incredibly reasonable. I would love to be able to have you on it. I feel like compliment you here. I think that you have a very even keel in the way that you present things, Bruce. It's really nice, and it's aligned with what I'm doing, but you have a wider range of experiences. You probably have a higher horsepower brain. There's a lot of stuff that you have that you can bring in that really help me to kind of sharpen my ideas and the ideas that I'm trying to put out there. So I really enjoyed this conversation with you, and I hope that maybe, I know you're busy and everything, but I would love to maybe do this again sometime, because I think that whatever my view is, or my whatever's kind of going through my head, I think that even if people disagree with you, I think that you're really good at articulating, your kind of perspective on things in a way that it's tough to not just be like, all right, well, yeah, that makes sense, even if you don't agree with it. I don't know. I thought it was a
Well, look,
great conversation. Thank you, Bruce.
That's a great compliment, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for your having me on. I don't know if you have show notes or something, but I welcome. Obviously, you're already there, but you or any of the listeners who want to sign up, shoot me an email. Basically, the first thing you ought to do is go look at the most recent one. So it's my pinned tweet at BPMEHLMAN. So check me out on Twitter. Check out on the pinned tweet. See if you can survive all the deluge of slides. If you find it interesting, on the last page I have my email. Send me an email. It's free. I'm happy to add anybody. Tell me you heard Cylinder Radio and you thought you'd like to follow along. And for friends of Will, the price remains $0. That's one of the things. And I'll bet you get this too with your podcast. One of the things that I love about doing this is I get emails from random. I'm a high school history and civics teacher. It's somebody out of the course of what I would normally do as a guy who works in Washington, yet I get to meet you and you're really interesting and I love what you're trying to do and trying to accomplish as a podcast host. And you were saying at the beginning, you keep it causes you to end up meeting all of these interesting people. Yeah. We're all better off if we get out of our comfort zone, if we meet people who aren't like us. In the world of Zoom, it's a lot easier, but podcasts make that so much easier, which is great, and track down people who do interesting but not unnecessarily offensive things. And whether you agree or you disagree, as long as it's not really out there, if it makes you a little bit uncomfortable because it's challenging your ideas, that's good. If it's somebody who's, truly offending you, not because they don't think we should raise taxes, because, you have to be a little bit tougher than that, but because they're really offensive, don't follow them. But Thanks for having me. I got the text that the pizza's ready.
This was awesome, man. Thank you so much. That's a great way to finish it. All right, take care.
Thanks for having me. See you, Will.
This has been Cylinder Radio. The success of this podcast and the educational revolution that I hope you will be a part of is dependent on those who find value in it. Please take a few moments to review us on iTunes so the show is more easily found. If there was a perspective on today's topic that was not highlighted in this episode, or you have an idea for an episode topic that you want to understand more deeply, please email us at cylinderradio@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram @WillRusch, WILLREUSCH. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to the next one.